You're all good.
Thank you so much. So why don't we call this officially to order? We're calling to order the meeting of the Disqualification Subcommittee. And today is the 28th of June. I don't know how that happened, but here we are. Mr. Vogel, can you do a formal roll call, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dawson? Ms. Dawson? Ms. Evans?
Present.
Mr. Geffen?
Here.
Mr. Urban? Mr. Urban? Ms. Kaser? Ms. Kaser? Judge Kulik?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Page?
Present.
Thank you. Representative Robbins? Representative Robbins. Ms. Sherlock?
Present.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, 5 of the 9 members are present. A quorum is present.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vogel. And then I think at
Hey,
this point,
John,
yes, please.
what Will is saying is that in these smaller subcommittees, he can see who's here, and we don't need to necessarily do a formal roll call. He can just mark off who's here, I think.
Okay. And maybe we'll
Is that
start
what you're saying, Will?
Yes, Ms. Evans, but it doesn't take too long to do the formal roll call.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I just wanted, because you said that a couple times and we've done it anyways. And we don't know the rules and stuff. And because I know when you're like, we're not trying to waste time doing it if we don't need to. So just want to make sure that that's clear, that we don't need to do it in these subcommittees. And if it's small like this, that you can just do that. Like, that's all. I just wanted to make sure people are understanding what we'll.
Okay, I appreciate that. And any input and advice people have on process and procedure, I appreciate. And so at this point, Mr. Vogel has posted on the website the subcommittee meeting minutes from last week's meeting on the 21st of June. Those, does anybody have any thoughts, corrections, edits, or suggestions regarding those meeting minutes? Okay, seeing nobody's hands up, I'm gonna adopt those meeting minutes as posted. Thank you, Mr. Vogel. Before we get started, we had a discussion, Mr. Vogel and I and Carol, about moving the disqualification subcommittee meetings back to every other week. We sort of had an idea that we needed to kind of hunker down as we went through the list of disqualifying offenses. It seems that we're coming through that, and it would be a good time now to maybe rethink that and go back to every other week. We are hoping to maybe increase our numbers that way, and also just to give you more time in this beautiful summer weather that we might have for a couple of weeks. And it makes sense to me, at least, to make that decision around this time as the July 4th holiday approaches. Do people have any thoughts about that? Yes, Judge.
I have actually taken off every single Friday for the rest of the summer. So they're my vacation days, and yeah, they are highly valued. And so I won't be there anyway on Fridays.
Okay.
Is that for the larger group though, isn't it?
Yeah, that the larger groups on Fridays. So we had sort of moved to every week as we plowed through. But I was thinking, if the group was open to it, moving back to every other week. I think we've made significant headway, and that could free up some time in maybe our discussions, although every other week.
And that would help. Normally, I mean, I like this week master calendar, I have to cut things off, and I hate to have to continue hearings for people. Otherwise, I'd still be on the bench right now, because that's tough for everybody to have to come on back. So it would be nice. This is really, really important. But yeah, if we can go to every other week, I'm all for that.
Okay. Does anybody have any concerns about that?
Mr. Chair, are there big lists of crimes that we're still gonna go through and decide and make decisions about, or what are the next steps that you see happening in this subcommittee?
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of it is going to end up repeating itself, because when you get through the 15 year, as you move to the 10 and 7, we're going to see a lot of that duplication. I think we'll have ongoing discussions, but I don't think we're going to have the same discussions. Does that make sense? I think there's some, like on the 7-year disqualification list, that don't exist on anything else, specifically maltreatment, for example. But for the most part, we're going to be going over the same stuff, just we're talking about severity levels. So those distinctions that we're making between property and personal and so on will remain the same.
In that case, I especially now that as a group we've kind of gotten in the groove on how to discuss these things, I have no issue with going to every other week. I think it may have been my idea to go to every week. So I'm happy to, with some of these summer nights, I'm happy to not meet.
I understand. And the truth is, if we find ourselves behind, we can fix it by elongating a few meetings or making decisions to go for a short time to every week again. So I thought it was the right decision when we started it, and it just makes sense to kind of maybe give us all a little break for at least the month of July. So I think that's what we're going to do, unless again there's anybody who has some opposition to that. We certainly want to make this an open discussion. But I'd say something now, or I'm going to ask Mr. Vogel to move forward and just sort of we'll skip next week and move on every other week again. Mr. Vogel, can you accept that task?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I'll send out an invite right after this meeting.
I appreciate that. Appreciate your help. What we're going to do now is, this is a little selfish. As I was gone for a couple weeks and totally unplugged, and as returned, I'm a little unclear about the discussion of the 152 matters, the 152 drug crimes, specifically the first degree through 5th degree. And I talked to a couple of people on the subcommittee, and I just was hoping we could have another maybe just short discussion of what's happened, and I have some of my own thoughts on it. And again, I apologize. I don't want people to have to retread and rehash everything, but I really think they're important ones as we move forward, since the numbers are so high and the set aside numbers are so high. If people could bear with me, I'd love to sort of understand a little bit more where we were at. Mr. Vogel, was there like a document that was being used?
Mr. Chair, we were using the there was an email that I forwarded last week. I'll find that and send a copy of the numbers. That we were using the revisor statutes page. However, I think the main working document. And
could we pull up the 152 controlled substance crimes, and if somebody could, and maybe Ms. Evans, are you in a position that you can take a little bit of a lead on telling us where we were with this discussion?
Yep. So we went through 1st through 5th degree and talked about both sales and possession. And Will, if you could shoot John over the doc that I took the notes in. I sent that to you, right?
Yes, Ms. Evans, I just did.
Yep. And then and so I think we all were pretty much in agreement that that 1st degree was both people and property, and then when it dropped down to kind of the lower degrees, it was a little divided about the people and property. The sales statutes talk about sales to minors under 18, and some language about sales in school zones and stuff, but the amounts are pretty low, like 6 grams and 3 grams and all of that. So we had some really good discussions about whether sales should be people and property and possession, but there's no real good way to, like, the statutes don't differentiate between sales, and it's just 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th degree. And so we didn't really talk about necessarily a new way to do that. Max did bring up the fact that maybe somebody could turn in like letters of rehabilitation with their, request or whatever. And so we had lots of conversation about that. I made notes in the
Okay.
boxes. But if anybody else has anything to add, I think that was the general consensus, though, was that 15 years, other than for first degree, seemed pretty long as a waiting period.
Was there any discussion about, I mean, because the way the Background Study Act is written, and Gina, I totally agree, it just sort of says felony convictions under 152 for the controlled substance crimes. Does it make sense to have a discussion about whether or not it should be separated into possession versus sales?
I think it does. I mean, like we have a clean slate to make some recommendations, and then maybe even like if people are going to be working in chemical dependency in the field, to have some kind of cutout as well. So I would love to talk more about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Judge, please.
Well, I just think this deserves a much more nuanced approach. And I realize that's tough because it's so easy to have a one size fits all, but that's
Yeah.
part of the problem. The current one size fits all says a first degree sale to a minor at the school is the same as a person who suffers from a substance abuse disorder and gets, a first time fifth degree. So that obviously makes no sense. But one of the points that I made is that, oh, nuts. Where am I? There we go. In drug treatment court, we do take the time and look at sales and see if it's the sort of low level sale that someone is engaging in just to afford their own use, or because there's really different kinds. And I think it deserves a look. Instead of always putting the burden on the person who has to do the set aside and not work for a year and a half and all that other stuff, I don't think it's impossible. We do it here in our little county every week, where we have people who understand addiction and understand the law, decide, where to draw the line.
Okay, I mean, I agree. I mean, the lack of nuance within the Background Study Act for controlled substance crimes is really, it's bizarre. Like, I mean, like you said, Judge, a little bit of possession is the same as the first degree sales. You both have 15-year disqualifications. So I think that's the first thing, though, is that we need something more nuanced. I guess the question is, what is that nuance? Because if we add the procedure, we do slow down the process, because we know with a lot of the 152 cases, they're getting set aside, especially on the fifth degree level. What are some thoughts? I mean, what do we what are some ideas for creating nuance without so much? I mean, we don't want hearings for everybody, because it'll slow the whole process down. What do we do?
But I think when it's an application where it isn't a sale, or even if it's, maybe we decide that 3 and 4 and 5, either use or possession or low level sale, accompanied with some sort of verification of sobriety, because that's really the guardrail here. When people are legitimately in recovery, man, they're the folks we want to be working with, and they're the ones we want employed. They bring so much knowledge and awareness and experience to being LACD or whatever. And I just wish that could be part of the application process, so that, yes, I have this, and I've got my college degree, and here's my verification of sobriety for 5 years, or whatever it might be. I just want to see them not have to go for a set aside, when I think it should be with certain qualifications then a given.
Can somebody look and tell me what does the data say about the percentage of fifth degree possessions that are being set aside.
1 second, Ms. Evans. So this doesn't answer set aside specifically. This is the collapsing of categories down to eligible to work or ineligible to work. But in 2018, of people who applied for reconsideration, 70% of applications with a fifth degree DQ were granted with something favorable, a set aside, a variance, that sort of thing. And in 2019, it was 63%. Percentages as a general rule went down in that year.
And Will, is that does that take into account the people that don't request a set aside?
It does not. And actually, let me share my screen for this. Just a moment. So no, the statistical universe here is of the people who applied for reconsideration of some sort, a set aside or challenging the correctness of the disqualification. And that number is a minority of people who are disqualified in the first place.
And I apologize. What line are you looking at?
I apologize. I'm throwing a whole spreadsheet up here. So here I'm looking at fifth degree controlled substance crime, where 70% received an outcome that we're calling eligible to work. So a set aside, a variance, an error found in the DQ, that sort of thing. I'd note highlighted in yellow are other controlled substance crimes and crimes involving substances, for example, felony driving while impaired. And interestingly enough, we see second and first degree, for example, as receiving higher set aside, et cetera, rates than fifth degree. And I think that holds true for 2019 as well. In this case, it's fourth and third. But for some reason, fifth degree actually lags in these data.
And that's why I would love to be able to know, like, why? Because I've seen quite a few set aside applications get denied because people just don't turn in the police reports and stuff with them because they don't think it's that big of a deal. And so, yeah, I would love to see like follow up data on that.
Okay.
I
And
think
the
a
number,
major, oh, excuse me.
I was just say the numbers are lower. Like the fourth degree, you only have 15 or 21 as opposed to 323. Okay.
That's an excellent point.
Um,
I guess stepping back, Mr. Chair, my major takeaway from this is that whether it's 70% or 86%, the majority of people who received a disqualification for these crimes, who then applied for reconsideration, got something.
So, I mean, what was the position of the group last time about, let's just talk about fifth degree for a second. Fifth degree possession, what were people's thoughts on whether or not that should remain a disqualifying offense, or I mean, was there a discussion about it? And if so, what the judge is talking about, I agree with it. If somebody is, I believe that that's a little bit of the criminalization sometimes of addiction. And if somebody's an addict or is having some issues with chemical dependency, that's the main issue, is chemical dependency as opposed to criminality. And but our process doesn't really allow you to submit information regarding, I don't know, sobriety at the beginning. It only allows it once you've been disqualified.
Well, Mr. Chair, Ms. Evans brought that up as something that maybe we change because of the unique nature of controlled substance crimes, that, that is something that if you are applying, you should be providing from the outset rather than being denied first. One could make an argument that should be part of the application process for the entire system to maybe expedite some of these set aside considerations, but it's worth considering. I have some other thoughts, but if folks want to discuss that point.
I mean, one of the things that's always been difficult is you can't pursue a set aside until you've been disqualified. You can't get disqualified until the department receives a background study from an employer or volunteer agency. So you kind of can't get ahead of it. You know what I mean? Like, let's say you want to be an LADC and you know you're going to get disqualified. Well, you actually have to get a job, get disqualified before you can pursue your set aside. And I think this is along the lines, Mr. Page, what you're saying, like, is there a way to kind of not have it scheduled that way, that you could get ahead of it and request even a set aside before, you lose that job?
So there was a bill this last year, Senator Corrin put it in, that was exactly that people could request their own set aside or their own background study for somebody that was in school or somebody that was applying for an intern, like going to be coming up on their internship, or like that anybody could apply for one to know what they're dealing with. And the other thing, like to Max's point, is like, that you have a drug conviction. And so as part of the, your application process, what would that look like? Like, you contact DHS and say, here's my certificate of recovery for you guys to have. I'm going to apply with this employer, and here it is. So you have it, because then you're really getting into HIPAA stuff then, right? Because it's, a treatment for certificate or whatever that is. Because like you don't have to share that with an employer. Most people would and could, and it's not that big of a deal. But for the state to be asking people to, like, it gets.
You can waive HIPAA and say, hey, I'm going to provide you with some medical records, and but they can't say you must.
Yeah.
And then you have a decision to make as an applicant. I'm going to avail myself, and I'm not giving it to my employer. I'm giving it to the state where it's it's still not public data. I think there's some issues, you're right, but I think we could work around. I really like the idea of having a mechanism where somebody can request their own background study and actually pursue something before having to go through all of this. Because then
there was a bill this year. It didn't pass along with everything else. So.
Because then I think you could do what Judge Kulik was talking about, is provide the proof of rehabilitation before the whole protracted set-aside process, which, you might not have a job at the end.
Isn't this how becoming licensed to practice law in the state of Minnesota works? You have to disclose all of your crimes ahead of time and explain why they shouldn't be considered anymore. And if we have the opportunity to redesign the system and see the waiting period with set-asides as a huge problem, why wouldn't we want to suggest another way to consider doing that?
I think it's a really good idea.
Yep, I agree. But in addition to that, we could suggest some crimes that don't pose risk of harm, maybe the ones that always get set aside, or some of the ones that maybe are less of a problem that they wouldn't have to deal with anymore. So
Ms. Evans,
look into that direction as well.
Like if, with like controlled substance in the 5th degree, you work in this field, you have experience that's significant. What do you see as that threshold when people who have some issues and some addiction issues are kind of sort of through the rough stuff and are doing well? Is it individually based? Do you see a specific amount of time? What do you see, and what do you think
so the data says 5 years, and it's interesting that recovery and criminal behavior, or the data says almost this identical thing. that after 5 years of being sober and or crime free, that a person's chances of either reoffending or relapsing drop by 85%. That's what the data shows. And so that 5-year period, you know, looking at someone's, you know, behavior for 5 years out, like they've established different patterns and all of that stuff. DOC says the same thing. After somebody's been out of our Minnesota DOC, after somebody's been out of our system for 5 years, they very rarely see them back. And so
let me ask you one thing, and just like if that data is true, like if you are 2 years in and you have a 1-day relapse, does that put you back to zero, or is that what's that happen?
No, not generally. I think, you know, recovery is a journey for folks. And what we see oftentimes, especially at Teen Challenge, because, you know, we're a lot of times people's 4th or 5th, you know, treatment, the spaces of recovery, like the lengths of recovery people have, a year, 2 years, 3 years, get longer every time. And then the periods of relapse get shorter. And so, and then there's a little thing to do with age that happens too. Like as people get older, it just stops being as much fun. And then you see recovery rates for people after 30, they get, recovery rates get higher, and then after 40 again. So, all of that's got stuff to do it. And we see it in crime too, right? Like there's most people in facilities are between, you know, early 20s to, you know, I don't even know exactly what it is, but you can see it. Like there's an age range of folks that are in facilities. Like just it gets old after a while, right? So
Got it. Do you think if we were to ask somebody to provide, I guess the first question is, would it be helpful for the group to get someone to present on sobriety data? Or is that, to me, I don't know enough about it.
I say absolutely, because it's one of the most common. It really is a health issue that we've criminalized. And this, more than I think any other area of crime that we've looked at, deserves that more understanding, so that our approach to it makes sense, doesn't deny our community the assistance of qualified folks, and doesn't deny them an opportunity to be employed. So yeah, let's get somebody in. I'd love that.
I think that makes sense too, because I think when we make recommendations, it would be nice to add the science behind it, just like we did with the juvenile component, to show some reasoning behind our recommendations. Ms. Evans, what do you think of that as a possibility?
Yep, I think that would be great. I will reach out to Rick Moldenhauer from DHS. He's like the behavioral health director of something or another, but and he's kind of the opioid guru right now, but he's been around for 35 years. Like everyone knows who he is, and see if he would be willing to come kind of talk to us about some of those time frames and how it the intersectionality between behavioral health and criminality and all of that stuff, and see if he'd be willing to do it, or who he would recommend to come.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think all of us agree that this is more nuanced and really important, because the numbers are so high, and whatever we do, we want to be thoughtful about it. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, Ms. Evans, you have that expertise and obviously the relationships to facilitate that.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, and one of the things as a practitioner that has always sort of been, I've struggled with, is the fact that, you know, another issue where there's a lack of nuance is that the LADC group is a part of the Background Study Act, you know, working with, you know, the elderly, and, you know, we talk about what vulnerable individuals, and then I'm not always so comfortable that the LADC group fits in the exact same statute. You know, there's the provision under 245C that Mr. Page worked on for the foster families. and I know Ms. Sherlock and Ms. Kaser don't know about it. Does it all make sense to carve out? I mean, this goes to the judges thing. We don't want to make it more difficult, but does it make sense to pull the LADCs not out of the statute, but it just seems a little different to me. You talk about like outpatient, LADCs of adults is not really the same as working with vulnerable patients in their homes. It just seems different to me. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
And I would just expand that to not just be like the licensed alcohol and drug counselors, but we have this new like area called peer recovery support specialists.
Yeah.
That is like, the kind of the more recent of folks that are, a year clean or 2 years clean, the better they are at that work. And they can't do that work. They can't be licensed through the state unless they can pass a background study. Like, that's Dewan. That's the work Dewan's doing. He had this great job that he was going to be able to do with Hennepin County, and they offered him the job, and then he couldn't do it because of his crime. And so it's like, some of that stuff is like, I would just ask that we don't narrow it so far down that it's just LADCs, but like people working in the licensed drug, like in the substance use disorder, like we have treatment techs that are graduates of our program that come back after a year and are treatment techs that hang out with our clients all day long and help them with meds and, get them to appointments and all of that stuff. And, they're the people that were, just in that same boat the year before. And that's who we want there. The clients need to see people that look like them and have been in their shoes doing well. Like that's the best thing for them. And so like,
Yeah.
not just the LADCs, but like our field,
And
they all have to pass a background check. Our kitchen people have to pass a background check. Our janitors have to pass a background check. Everyone has to pass a background check.
in terms of, so it's my understanding, if you want to be an LADC, that's a license, correct?
It is.
And so, I mean, what's always a little
Yep.
bit strange to me is that you have a licensing board that could license you, but you still might not be able to work because DHS disqualifies you. Are there other entities like the peer recovery specialists? Are they licensed? Is anyone else licensed besides the LADC?
No, but anybody that works under the 245G license has to pass a background check. So anybody that works under our license as a treatment program still has to pass the background check.
Okay.
So
Okay.
they just passed a bill, and I'll send it over to you to take a look at. They passed a background study bill this year that says something about, I still don't understand it completely, but it says something about if you've already passed a background check through your licensing board, you don't have to pass a background check through DHS. I'll send it to you. It passed this year to take a look at and see what you think.
Yeah, I mean, that would be important to me to understand because that would carve out a lot of people, nurses, and LADCs and others that wouldn't have to go through background. That would make, I think we need to know that.
Yep. And it was specific for like long-term care facilities and there was a specific grouping of providers that were included in it. I'll send it over to you when I get where I'm going.
Great. Will, do you think you could pull up to 245C6? I think it's 16.
Certainly. 16 or 15? 15 is the list of disqualifying crimes.
Yeah, let's do 15 first.
I think while Will is doing that, I just think I would echo what Miss Evans was sharing about, we might not want to narrow so much if we're thinking about carving out or making some nuances with the substance use crimes and what's a disqualification to just like LADCs, because I think about too in residential treatment centers for youth, all of the individuals who work under that also have to pass a background check. So again, you're talking about support staff, janitors, kitchen staff, same thing applies. So it's kind of across the board that we have to maybe think about when is it truly a risk of harm that we need to disqualify people, and when do we maybe need to take some time to really understand, hey, it's a disqualification, you can request a set aside and go through that process.
Right. And just sort of tracking that, Ms. Kisser, do you believe that we should try to separate the kind of that LADC group from, sort of this catch-all rest of everybody who works with vulnerable populations and children?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I wonder if we need to make some changes overall, but maybe for LIDCs, we look at it differently for maybe some of the first and second degree, because that might be an area that they might have some of those charges, but doesn't maybe mean that they shouldn't be working in that field. Maybe they're the best suited for that field because they've had, 5-10 years of sobriety, and now we've disqualified them for 15. So maybe that's a subset that we want to look at it differently for maybe those higher level offenses, but those lower level, like 5th degree, for example, maybe across the board, it's not a disqualification.
I mean, I think we can do both, right? We could suggest some revamping of the 152 crimes and whether they're disqualifiers and for how long, and then sort of separate LADCs too, because I mean, the thing that I always go back to is it's not saying that everybody with a criminal record gets a job. It just says the employer gets to look at the totality of that person and make a decision. So there's still, significant, in my opinion, check and balance there. Will, can you scroll down a little bit under 245C? Because if you wouldn't mind, just keep going down for a sec. Just a little bit more, past 7, a little bit. This is the section I was thinking of. So 4A. And Mr. Page, this is a lot of the work that was done was the creation of 4A. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So this was sort of carving out a little bit of a different scheme for the family foster care setting. And I just wonder if we ever want to look at creating maybe there is a 4B, I don't know, a 4B for LADC. It just always has struck me as something that doesn't really fit the same rules. But I can certainly take some pushback on that if anybody thinks so.
And what do you think that would look like, John?
I don't know, man. That's too much. I can find problems. I can't fix them. It just seems to me that there should be more understanding that people with these drug convictions should have more latitude to work in areas where they're contributing to somebody's recovery. It just seems to me that those people are in great position to help others. And not only does it help the person, from an employment standpoint, it helps, I think, people in recovery. That's my understanding, that those are the people that have a lot to offer, and our current scheme makes it really hard. I think Mr. Tatum and others who just get knocked out of jobs that they would be really good at because they have these offenses.
Mr. Chair, may I offer some thoughts on
Please.
So one thing that we kind of touched on last time was the thought that the legislature has set, the degree of drug possession or sale essentially based on the amount that is sold or possessed. And there are some exceptions within each degree, selling to a minor, for example, but it's mostly based on the amount that you are selling or possessing. There is obviously, I think, some arbitrariness to the amounts that the legislature has selected. And I'm not saying it's too low or too high or too much varying of amount between degrees, but it is just by definition arbitrary. I think also whether one is charged with possessing or selling, given the broad definition of sale, is it can be a matter of circumstance whether one is charged with those or the other. And further complicating matters, I think, an individual can be charged with a high amount but plead to a lesser amount as part of a plea deal. And so the actual conviction may be very different than a charge. And this is all to say that, it's in my mind, for disqualification purposes, it's really hard to draw a line between second and third, for example, or third and fourth, and to create a bright line rule. One idea that we discussed was if a bright line rule does need to be created, is to look at the drug sentencing guidelines grid. There are very few, particularly first-time offenses that have a presumptive prison commit, and it's really just controlled substance crime in the first degree and an aggravated one. I think, and depending on your criminal history score, there are presumptive commits for subsequent offenses for the lower crimes. And I just think it would be worth considering how the sentencing guideline grid, along with the aggravated factors that are listed in 152.01 subdivision 24, could be used as guideposts for determining length or whether disqualification period should exist at all. It may be worth exempting fifth degree entirely. That may be a bright line that we could also draw. But I do think between the grid and the aggravating factors, we could come up with some sort of scheme based on those things.
Would that occur kind of at the front end, do you think, Mr. Page? Like, I'm just trying to figure out how you do that without upsetting DHS on how to implement it. And
I don't know that there is an easy way to do that, or I don't know that there's an easy way to do any of this. I think the drug crimes are just like the trickiest ones when we're trying to create a system. I'm just highlighting those as natural dividing lines. In my mind, more natural dividing lines than first, second, third, and fourth and fifth degree.
got it.
And that we don't necessarily have to use that framework just because the legislature has laid out those varying levels.
Okay.
And would note that, the commits to prison are, that suggests that the level of drug crime is such that they pose some greater danger to the community, which we do want to separate out from those who are addicted or, recovering and that kind of thing.
Mr.
Yeah,
Vogel?
and
Go on.
oh, sorry, John.
No,
Well, I
please.
disagree with you that we have to be very careful not to. So the way that it's set up right now is that, when people are applying for jobs, it's set up so that DHS can mostly get through applications and get answers back to employers, hopefully very quickly on the first round. They just look up someone's criminal history, make sure there's nothing that's disqualifying, and get a yes back to people that are yes pretty quickly. And then the ones that are a no, then that's where the hang time is, right? And so for us to not, recommend anything, because if DHS says no, the legislature is going to be a hard sell. And so when we add things like, aggravating factors or things where DHS is going to have to do a deeper dive in right away, I feel like that's DHS is going to be a no on stuff like that. Like they need to get through that first round of stuff pretty quickly to get answers back. And then that's what the set aside process is for them to look deeper into stuff to, and so as I would just encourage us as we're thinking about ways to fix this and like recommendations for us to like, they have to be like first glance stuff. Am I making sense?
I think we understand what you're saying, that, I mean, I think it's this constant pull. We want it to be nuanced and individualized to make sure the risk of harm is addressed, but DHS can't look at everyone and get back with an answer in, 15 days. No, I think it's the quintessential problem with the whole statute is how do you satisfy those two needs? It's the problem. And then I think it's why it's somewhat, well, more than somewhat arbitrary is there's just a line. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that.
I've thought that, just to your point too, Max, like I've thought that for not just drug crimes, about using the guidelines for the whole system. Like, how do we use the guidelines that's already established for all of it? Like, I don't know what that would look like, but get rid of everything that's a severity level 1. And then the stuff in the middle is 5 years and the stuff on the top is 10. Like, how could we make this easier, So that's what I've been thinking from the very beginning. So I could get with something like that if it could be easier, not easier, but like if it made sense,
I'm just going to jump in and I just have to log
Please.
off early. So sorry, I came late and I have to leave early. So, but thanks, Kevin. Everyone have a great 4th of July and we'll see you here in July.
Thanks so much, Ms. Case. I mean, and the reason I was hoping we could kind of revisit this, because I think this is a really big issue, and I don't know if we have any great answers, but I think we got to keep plugging away. Anybody else have any thoughts of how to untangle, the drug offenses from the statute? Any other ideas, schemes?
Since the system isn't capable or doesn't have the resources or won't bring the resources to bear to give it the nuanced approach that we would like, maybe we have to draw some lines in our what our recommendations are going to be. And so maybe we decide that all 5th degrees, none of the 5th degrees are going to have any sort of disqualification if somebody's in recovery for some minimal amount of time. Maybe we decide the small sales, same thing. Maybe we carve out only those heavy duty sales with the aggravating factors where a gun is used, to children, on school property, public housing, some of those. But if we need bright lines, then let's create some bright lines and still have a process whereby you apply, disclose your crime. Like Mr. Page was talking about, when you apply for the bar exam or to be licensed as an attorney, tell them what crimes you've committed and argue why you shouldn't be disqualified because of them. Much better system.
I mean, I think what we could do as we write this recommendation is to sort of say, we think a system that is more nuanced makes more sense, but we also understand that there is a financial limitation and maybe just a lack of desire. And here's some, here's suggestion B. If we're going to create bright lines, here they are. They're not perfect, but they're more in line with public safety and equity to individuals than the current scheme. But I mean, I think we have the ability to say, hey, even this is flawed, but it's less flawed. Mr. Vogel, have you done, and I'm not trying to put you on this, but have you looked at other states and how they do criminal offenses that involve drugs?
Mr. Chair, off the top of my head, no. I can definitely make a note of that, however.
What do you, I mean, do we, I mean, do we want to look at other states, specifically Midwest states, to see how they're looking at, you know, where their lines are?
I think we do. I think it's a real signal if we are a total outlier.
I think that would be a good thing to know. Like, are we in left field? And are other people just doing a lot of sales stuff? But how are other states dealing with this problem? Yeah, I'm interested in it.
I am too, John. I think that's a super great idea for us to look specifically at drug convictions and how other states handle it. I think that's a great idea.
And then I think that supports any recommendation we make to moving forward to sort of say, hey, what we do is different, or what we do is the same, and take it from there as we draft it.
And I would say, Will, really to focus on other states, not near us, but like us. So South Dakota, North Dakota, maybe Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio.
Wisconsin, I would imagine.
Yep. And so like, don't do California or any like other states like us.
We're like California? Oh, I love it.
No, I said not California, not
Okay.
California.
Well, I thought you said we're like California. That made me sound like we were
Yeah,
cool.
it was special. Made us sound special.
I like it. Okay. Yeah, I think that would be helpful, Will. Is that something you can, I mean, I know we keep throwing a lot on you, but is that something you can undertake, or we could undertake as partners on that?
Definitely, Mr. Chair. Yeah, with the preliminary work that I've already done, I've got a list of statutes I can go through to look specifically for drug crimes. Then I can also work with you and Mr. Esme's colleagues. Yeah.
Perfect. So let's work on that, and maybe in 2 weeks' time we can present something back to the subcommittee on that. I'm really interested in how they separate between sales and possession. I mean, obviously their statutory scheme on convictions is going to be a part of it too, but the more that we can understand that, I kind of think the better. Would it be possible to have somebody maybe from the LADC board present to the group on how it looks at former convictions? And would that,
we could definitely talk to Roy about it.
do you think that has value? It does to me, just to understand more people who are practicing in the area and are licensing people, how they look at it, because, you know, DHS has some expertise, but not specifically and only on LADC issues. Maybe that's our number 3, that if we want it, we can add it, but the other ones might be more important and more helpful. I'll put together for the next meeting too, just all the, maybe something a little more robust on what the numbers are on all offenses involving 152 and how they're set aside. I'll try to get my I was going to say my nerd on, but maybe that's not okay to say anymore, but something pretty, I'll get my number crunching on and try to get something together real brief to sort of show those numbers, because the numbers for these are really high. And a lot of really good people who could provide really good work and assistance have these on the records. You know, I did have one question too for DHS, and maybe somebody knows the answer to this. So if you look at 152, Judge, you know, when cases go through, like we used to call them 152-18s, where you're sort of routed through, it's not really a diversion, but it's a program where at the end of it and you complete it, you actually get to say you've never been convicted of an offense.
Right. Right, yeah, and it's that statutory safe adjudication for a fifth degree, whether, and by weight, it might be a gross misdemeanor, but it might be a felony too.
Okay,
And yeah, then you get that stay of adjudication, and hopefully you complete your probationary period with no problems or no big problems, and the matter gets dismissed. So yeah, conviction is never entered and it gets dismissed and there's absolutely no record. And it is one of the greatest opportunities that we can give people, because a lot of folks they get on track and they get to walk away and not have it dog them for the rest of their life. Because it's not just these disqualifications. A felony conviction, if you're trying to get into school, rent an apartment, get a job.
do we know though whether so let's say a case goes through that judge and they get the 152.18, they complete it and it's dismissed, is that a disqualifying case?
Well, if the agency can look beyond and just at charges and do their preponderance of the evidence, yikes,
Is there anyone from DHS that we can get an answer to that? Because I'd like a provision in there that says that's not a disqualifying event. Max, you know anything on that, how that's looked at? I just don't know.
I'm not sure how that works, but I wholeheartedly agree that that's a good tool and should not be disqualifying. My guess is that it is, because they search for charges and that would be identifiable in those searches, but I'm not positive.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think we should know the answer to that and then make a recommendation on a 152.18.
And keep in mind that you have to successfully complete 2 years of probation, part of which is abstaining from the use or possession of any, non-prescribed controlled substance or alcohol. And if you can't successfully complete probation, a conviction can enter. So
Right.
if you've managed to not get convicted over it, it means you have been successful. You are in recovery. So I just don't think it should be considered either. But right now the agency can do that preponderance of the evidence, which scares the heck out of me, frankly.
So, and us getting rid of POE, I think would be a part of that. And then the one thing that I wonder about though, Max, is we talked about this a little bit. So I talked to Kelly Moeller about it, because she had mentioned something about that. And she just wanted to bring this up to, probably I should bring it up in the bigger group, but she just wanted to talk about, they did that felony murder law reform group and thought that they had some consensus. And then when some groups went back to their big group, the consensus wasn't there with the bigger groups. And so as we're making these decisions, she was just wondering what is the mechanism as we're making these recommendations or agreeing to these recommendations, for you, Judge Kulik, going back to the bench to say, here's what we're talking about, this is kind of what we're agreeing to. Is the judicial branch, is this good? Or Max, you to go back to Bob or Nancy to say, we're talking about, the fact that maybe POE isn't doing what we want it to do and getting rid of it, so that when and if that happens, then later on,
I would support really taking a deep dive
saying
and
we don't
looking at
support this bill.
the whole preponderance of the evidence.
Hold on. Okay, go ahead. What did you say, Judge?
Someone can be charged and ultimately dismissed, but if you're exercising preponderance of the evidence, but there's no one arguing the other side, and you are looking just at a complaint or maybe an original police report, it could be that there was an alternate perpetrator who was ultimately, found to be the person, so yours gets dismissed. But without knowing any of that, you can still get disqualified by preponderance of the evidence based on just what comes in from law enforcement and the prosecutor. And that's just one example. So it's not a good way to go.
And Gina, I think you raised a good point. Like, how do we synthesize everybody's thoughts with the bigger group? You know, if somebody's a part of this as a representative of something bigger, how do they go back and get consensus from that group? Is that kind of what you're talking about too, Gina?
Yep. Kelly was mentioning. Representative Moeller. That's what Representative
Sure.
Moeller was mentioning. Like, what is the mechanism that we're using? And I was just picking, like,
I think we should add that.
Because I know that.
I think
I know him.
we should add that to the agenda for the next big meeting to sort of talk about how that mechanism works. Because
Yep.
I think
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Because I don't have an answer. I see that our hour's up, and I want to be respectful of people's time and that it's a beautiful day. So we're gonna cut it off here, and we're gonna wait a couple weeks before we see everybody again. I think Will, you and I, and Gina, and anybody else that's interested can maybe get together offline the next day or so about how we start gathering this information, because I think this is such a meaty, important issue. We gotta do it right.
Yep. And we should have this other data before we finish the 152 stuff. Like, we need to have the science and stuff.
And Will, you and I and Gina, do you think we can figure out who to talk to at DHS on that 15218? Because when I was looking at that, I really think it's an important issue for us to know the answer to.
Mr. Chair, we could definitely have the discussion offline.
Okay.
Without wanting to put her on the spot, I will note that Ms. Cassane from DHS is here. I doubt she has the answer, but you could also ask her to make people over there aware of that question.
I wasn't going to put her on the spot, but since you did it, Ms. Cassane, any thoughts on that?
I don't mind being put on the spot ever. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. But I can certainly ask our team here and get a response back to you.
I would appreciate that so very much. And yeah, I didn't think anyone would know that off the top of their head, but I
Do
appreciate
you think that would go under admissions?
It could be admission, POE. If it's a stay of adjudication, you know, I think there are a lot of places it could go. But it was designed. I mean, the fact that the statute specifically says that you never have to admit that you've done it, and it actually puts you back in the place like it never happened, seems so different than any other type of offense.
Not quite.
Yeah.
There's a plea, but it is not. The plea is out there, a factual basis to back up the plea, but the court does not accept it and enter conviction. So that is why it's a stay. And so it never gets accepted. You know, if the person's successful, it never gets accepted. But yeah, there is a guilty plea with a factual basis. I just don't accept it. I instead stay adjudication.
Got it.
So, I mean, that is the basis, but here this wonderful legislative tool was created so that people, so it doesn't ruin their lives unnecessarily if they go into recovery and it's a, first time deal. And since the goal of the stay of adjudication was to let people successfully get past having committed that crime, why are we holding them back?
And, in the expungement statute, it's explicitly included as really you're entitled to it, but you actually still have to do it. But I mean, I think it further shows that wasn't designed to ruin somebody's life. Okay, I've kept everybody long enough. I want to thank everybody for their time, expertise, and enjoy your fourth. Anything else, Mr. Vogel, that we forgot to address?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
See y'all soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Max.